I caught my wife cheating with my best friend. Then I exposed them both in the most brutal way and did this. For most of my life, I prided myself on being a good judge of character. I valued loyalty, trust, and honesty, both in friendships and in marriage. That's why, when I married Claire, I believed we had built something unshakable. She was my anchor, my partner, the person I thought I could trust with my life. Together, we had created a life that felt secure, a comfortable home, stable careers, and a circle of close friends that brought joy to our lives. Among those friends was Eric, someone I had known since college. He was one of those larger-than-life personalities, always the loudest voice in the room and the guy who could make anyone laugh. Our bond had been forged over years of shared experiences, from late-night cramming for exams to road trips filled with bad music and worse decisions. He was practically family, so much so that he had been the best man at my wedding. Life carried on smoothly for years. Claire and I settled into the rhythms of married life, while Eric remained a constant presence, always ready to join us for dinner parties, barbecues, or the occasional weekend getaway. Looking back, it was almost too perfect, too seamless, like the pieces of a puzzle that fit together so you don't notice the cracks forming underneath. The first crack appeared in a seemingly innocent way. Claire had been glued to her phone more often than usual, her face lit by its glow as she typed away late into the night. I didn't think much of it at first. Everyone's a little too attached to their devices these days, but something about her behavior felt different. She would glance at me nervously when I entered the room, or quickly lock her screen when I got too close. I brushed it off as work stress, or maybe a new hobby she hadn't told me about. But as the weeks went on, her phone obsession grew more noticeable. Texts would light up her screen at odd hours, and her laughter, soft but unmistakable, would drift through the house when she thought I wasn't listening. The second crack came one Friday evening when Eric came over for dinner. The three of us were laughing and reminiscing about old times when Claire excused herself to grab a bottle of wine from the kitchen. Eric's phone buzzed on the coffee table, lighting up with a notification. Instinctively, I glanced at the screen and froze. The message wasn't long, but it was enough to make my stomach churn. "Can't wait to see you again. Last night was perfect." The sender's name was Claire. The world seemed to tilt as I stared at the message, my mind racing to process what I had just seen. Eric, oblivious to my reaction, casually picked up his phone, glanced at the screen, and smiled before tucking it back into his pocket. For the rest of the evening, I felt like a stranger in my own home. Claire and Eric chatted and laughed as if nothing had happened, while I sat there, numb and silent. My mind replayed every interaction I had ever witnessed between them, searching for the signs I had missed. How long had this been going on, and why hadn't I seen it sooner? That night, I barely slept. My mind was a whirlwind of anger, betrayal, and disbelief. Claire's late nights on her phone, her sudden bursts of laughter, her reluctance to share details about her day, it all made sense now. And Eric, my so-called best friend, had been complicit in it all. But I wasn't ready to confront them. Not yet. If this was what I thought it was, I needed proof. The next morning, I began my quiet investigation. Claire had left her phone charging on the counter while she took a shower, and I seized the opportunity to look through it. What I found confirmed my worst fears. There, buried in her messaging app, was a thread of text between her and Eric. They weren't just casual or friendly. They were intimate, explicit, and filled with details about secret meetings and whispered promises. My stomach churned as I read message after message, each one a dagger to the heart. It wasn't just the content of the text that devastated me. It was the tone. Claire didn't just love Eric, she adored him. Her words were laced with the kind of affection and vulnerability I hadn't seen from her in years. I took screenshots of everything, transferring the messages to a private folder on my computer. It wasn't enough to know the truth. I needed the evidence to confront her, to show her that she couldn't lie or manipulate her way out of this. The days that followed were some of the longest of my life. I watched Claire and Eric closely, noticing the little signs I had ignored before. The lingering glances, the subtle touches, the way they seemed to share an unspoken connection that excluded me entirely. It was like being an outsider in my own life, watching a conspiracy unfold before my eyes. But I wasn't going to let them get away with it. If they thought they could carry on their affair without consequences, they were sorely mistaken. One evening, as I sat alone in my office, staring at the mountain of evidence I had gathered, an idea began to form. Confronting them directly wouldn't be enough. Not for something this calculated, this cruel. I needed to expose them for what they were, to show the world the lies they had built their relationship on. And so, the plan was born. It would take time, patience, and precision, but I was ready to commit to it. By the time I was done, Claire and Eric wouldn't just face my wrath. They'd face the consequences of their betrayal in front of everyone they thought they had fooled. The morning after I discovered the messages, I woke with a singular focus. My revenge wouldn't just be swift, it would be unforgettable. Claire and Eric had gone to great lengths to deceive me, and they would feel the weight of their betrayal in ways they couldn't imagine. But I wasn't going to confront them, not yet. Anger could be a powerful tool when controlled, but I knew if I acted impulsively, I'd lose the upper hand. Instead, I channeled my fury into preparation, methodically piecing together a plan that would expose them on my terms. The first step was to gather irrefutable proof. The screenshots of Claire and Eric's messages were a good start, but I needed more. I started small, setting up a keylogger on Claire's phone and laptop. It didn't take long for it to yield results. Within days, I had a treasure trove of evidence. Emails, chats, and even photos exchanged between them. Their correspondence wasn't just limited to casual texts. It was an elaborate network of plans and confessions, woven with the kind of detail that made my stomach churn. They had nicknames for each other and side jokes, and a shared calendar with dates for their getaways. One particular message thread stood out. Eric had suggested meeting at a secluded hotel just outside the city for the weekend, and Claire had eagerly agreed. It was a perfect opportunity to confirm what I already knew. That Friday, Claire claimed she had a work conference, complete with rehearsed excuses about late nights and networking sessions. She kissed me goodbye at the door, her smile as radiant as it had been on our wedding day. It was sickening. I followed her, keeping my distance as she drove to the hotel. Sure enough, Eric was waiting for her in the parking lot. I watched as they embraced, their familiarity with each other a sharp contrast to the cold distance Claire had shown me in recent months. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, the temptation to confront them boiling under my skin. But I resisted. This wasn't the time. Instead, I took photos and videos from a discreet distance, documenting every moment of their rendezvous. Back home that night, I reviewed the footage, my heart pounding with a mix of anger and determination. It was undeniable, indisputable proof. But even that wasn't enough. If I was going to expose them, I needed to do it in a way they'd never forget. That's when the idea hit me. I would use their own words against them. I spent the next week creating a presentation. It was as meticulous as it was damning, filled with screenshots, photos, and excerpts from their messages. I laid it out chronologically, detailing every step of their affair, from the flirtatious beginnings to the brazen betrayal I had witnessed at the hotel. The final touch was the piece de resistance, a printed compilation of their messages. I formatted them into a sleek, professional booklet, complete with a cover page that simply read, "Lies We Tell Ourselves, The Affair of Claire and Eric." Once the presentation was ready, I needed an audience. Exposing Claire and Eric privately would have been satisfying, but it wouldn't make the statement I wanted. They had lied to me, used me, and laughed behind my back. Now, I would return the favor. I decided to wait for the perfect moment. Claire and I had been planning a small gathering with friends and family to celebrate an upcoming milestone in her career, a promotion she had worked hard for. It was the ideal stage. The people closest to us would be there, and Claire would never see it coming. In the days leading up to the event, I played the part of the doting husband flawlessly. I smiled, offered to help with the preparations, and even complimented her on her dress choices. She seemed oblivious to the storm brewing just beneath the surface, too wrapped up in her double life to notice my subtle shifts. Meanwhile, I made arrangements to ensure everything would unfold perfectly. I contacted a few key people, mutual friends who had always suspected something was off about Claire and Eric, but never had proof. They agreed to help me set up the presentation and distribute the booklets when the time came. By the morning of the party, everything was in place. Claire spent hours getting ready, radiating excitement as she prepared to bask in the glow of her achievements. Eric arrived early, his usual charismatic self, completely unaware of the trap he was walking into. I watched them interact, their stolen glances and whispered conversations a stark reminder of the betrayal that had brought us to this moment. But instead of anger, I felt a strange calm. The time for rage had passed. Now it was time for action. As the guests settled in and the party began, I waited for the perfect moment. Claire stood at the center of the room, thanking everyone for their support and gushing about how much the evening meant to her. She was in her element, playing the role of the accomplished professional and devoted wife. When she finished, I stepped forward holding the first copy of the booklet. The room fell silent as I cleared my throat, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. This evening is about celebrating achievements. I began, my voice steady. And I think it's only fair to share something Claire and Eric have been working on together for quite some time. I handed the booklet to Claire, watching as her expression shifted from confusion to horror. She flipped through the pages, her face paling with each turn. Across the room, Eric stood frozen, his usual bravado replaced by sheer panic. As the whispers began to ripple through the crowd, I took out my phone and connected it to the TV screen. With the push of a button, the presentation began, projecting their messages and photos for everyone to see. The room fell into stunned silence as the presentation continued to play on the TV screen. Slide after slide, the weight of Claire and Eric's betrayal unfolded in front of everyone. I had spared no detail. Screenshots of texts, images of their secret meetings, and a meticulous timeline showing the overlap of their deception with moments in our lives that were supposed to mean something. Anniversaries, birthdays, holidays. For a few agonizing moments, Claire stood frozen at the center of the room, holding the booklet in trembling hands. Her face shifted from pale shock to deep crimson, the dawning horror of exposure crashing over her. She tried to compose herself, but the whispers spreading through the room were like wildfire, growing louder with each passing second. Eric, standing near the back of the room, looked equally stunned. His usual smug demeanor had evaporated, replaced by a look of sheer panic. He shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting toward the door as though he were calculating the quickest way to escape. When the final slide displayed on the screen, a photo of them embracing in the hotel parking lot, the tension reached its breaking point. Claire snapped the booklet shut and turned to face me, her mouth opening as though to speak. But before she could say anything, Sarah, one of Claire's oldest friends, stepped forward from the crowd. "This is disgusting," Sarah said, holding up her phone for everyone to see. Her voice was sharp, cutting through the murmur of the room. But what's worse is that this isn't even the first time Eric's pulled something like this. Her words sent a shockwave through the room, and all eyes turned to her. Claire froze, confusion flashing across her face as Sarah continued. "Eric's been messing around with people behind the scenes for years," Sarah went on, her tone filled with righteous anger. "Not just Claire, but others too. And he doesn't stop at flirting. He uses his charm to manipulate, to twist people into doing what he wants. I've seen it before." The accusations spilled out like floodwaters, unleashing years of pent-up frustration and suspicion. Other women in the room began chiming in, recounting stories of Eric's flirtations, his inappropriate comments, and his relentless pursuit of control. One woman revealed how Eric had tried to undermine her relationship by spreading lies to her boyfriend. Another spoke of how he had gotten uncomfortably close to her at a party, brushing off her discomfort as just joking around. The revelations painted a picture of a man who thrived on manipulation and deceit, leaving a trail of broken trust and fractured relationships in his wake. Claire's face twisted as the accusations mounted. The affair she had thought was passionate and unique was being revealed as just another conquest in Eric's long history of betrayals. For the first time that evening, I saw the realization settle in her eyes. She wasn't special to him. But the evening wasn't finished with its revelations. As the crowd grew louder, my phone buzzed in my pocket. I stepped into the hallway to check the notification, my heart racing with anticipation. It was an email from an anonymous sender, the subject line reading, "You don't know the full story." I opened the email cautiously. Attached were scanned copies of receipts, messages, and financial records that made my blood run cold. They showed Claire and Eric siphoning money from my joint account over the past year. Thousands of dollars spent on hotel stays, trips, and expensive gifts. It wasn't just betrayal. It was theft, calculated and deliberate. The email had no sender information, no explanation beyond the attached evidence. But it was damning. Someone had gone to great lengths to ensure I had every piece of the puzzle. When I returned to the living room, the tension was palpable. Claire was arguing with Sarah, her voice rising in desperation as she tried to defend herself. Eric, meanwhile, had retreated to the corner, his shoulders hunched as though trying to disappear. I cleared my throat, silencing the room. All eyes turned to me as I held up my phone. "For those of you who thought this couldn't get any worse," I said, projecting the email and its attachments onto the TV screen, "here's what Claire and Eric have really been doing behind my back." The room gasped as the financial records appeared on the screen. Each transaction was listed in black and white. Hotel bills, travel expenses, and even lavish dinners paid for with money they had stolen from me. The whispers grew louder, turning into open expressions of disgust and disbelief. Claire's face crumpled as she stared at the screen, tears streaming down her cheeks. She tried to speak, but the weight of the evidence left her at a loss for words. Eric, seeing no way out, bolted for the door without a word, leaving Claire to face the fallout alone. The chaos that followed was overwhelming. Claire's family confronted her, their disappointment and anger spilling out in a torrent of questions she couldn't answer. Friends who had once admired her looked on with disdain, their sympathy evaporating in the face of her betrayal. But the night wasn't over. Later, as I sat in the now empty living room, reviewing the events of the evening, another email arrived. The sender was anonymous, but the message was clear. "You're not the only one who wanted justice. Check your mailbox tomorrow. There's more you need to see." The email was as cryptic as it was unsettling. I stared at the screen, reading the message over and over. "You're not the only one who wanted justice. Check your mailbox tomorrow. There's more you need to see." Whoever had sent it clearly had a vested interest in my situation. But what was their motivation? Was this someone who had also been hurt by Eric's manipulations? Or was it a calculated move by someone with their own agenda? The next morning, I made my way to the mailbox with a sense of foreboding. The crisp air did little to calm my nerves as I opened the metal door and found a small, padded envelope with no return address. Inside was a USB drive and a handwritten note. "You've scratched the surface. Here's what lies beneath." I hurried back inside, my hands trembling as I plugged the drive into my laptop. The files it contained were more explosive than I could have imagined. The first folder was labeled Eric's Web and contained a detailed dossier on his activities over the past decade. Bank statements showed a history of dubious transactions, including large sums of money transferred between accounts under different names. There were emails outlining his involvement in questionable business deals and text messages where he bragged about playing people like chess pieces. But the most damning discovery was a series of explicit videos. They featured Eric in compromising situations with multiple women, some of whom I recognized from our social circle, others who were strangers. The videos were accompanied by dates and locations, proving they had been taken over the span of several years. It became clear that Eric's betrayal extended far beyond his affair with Claire. He was a serial manipulator, using charm and deceit to exploit anyone who crossed his path. The second folder, labeled Claire's Decisions, was equally gut-wrenching. It contained text exchanges and voice recordings that painted a picture of a woman deeply conflicted, but ultimately complicit. In one particularly damning recording, Claire admitted to Eric that she had used my trust against me, justifying her actions as what needed to be done to feel alive again. In another message, she discussed leaving me entirely, but expressed concern about the financial implications. It was clear that much of her hesitation wasn't about guilt or love. It was about security. But the final file was the one that truly shattered me. It was a signed document, a loan agreement between Claire and Eric, backed by my assets without my knowledge. They had borrowed tens of thousands of dollars, funneling the money into what appeared to be a failing business venture Eric had been running under a fake name. My anger burned hot, but beneath it was a deep, gnawing hurt. Claire hadn't just betrayed me emotionally. She had actively conspired to steal from me, to gamble my future for the sake of her affair. The more I uncovered, the more I realized how carefully orchestrated their deceit had been. But one question remained unanswered. Who had sent me this information? That evening, another email arrived from the anonymous sender. This time, it was more direct. Eric isn't the mastermind he thinks he is. If you want the whole story, meet me at 8 p.m. downtown near the old clock tower. I'll explain everything. Against my better judgment, I decided to go. Whoever this person was, they had given me the tools to dismantle Claire and Eric's lies. If they had more to offer, I needed to hear it. The clock tower was deserted when I arrived, the shadows stretching long under the dim streetlights. I waited, my breath visible in the cool night air. A figure emerged from the darkness, their face hidden beneath a hood. As they approached, they pulled the hood back, revealing a face I hadn't expected to see. Sarah, Claire's friend, the one who had confronted Eric at the party, looked at me with a mix of determination and regret. "It's worse than you think," she said quietly. Over the next hour, Sarah unraveled the truth. She had been tracking Eric's actions for years after he had manipulated one of her close friends into a toxic relationship that left her emotionally shattered. Sarah had started digging, uncovering the layers of his deceit, but she hadn't been able to stop him. When she realized Claire was his newest target, she began collecting evidence, hoping to expose him before more damage was done. Her motivation wasn't just revenge. It was justice for everyone Eric had hurt. She had sent me the files and orchestrated the anonymous messages, knowing I was the only one close enough to deliver the final blow. As Sarah finished her story, a new sense of clarity washed over me. This wasn't just about Eric or Claire anymore. It was about putting an end to the cycle of destruction they had created. With Sarah's help, I began to compile everything we had into a comprehensive file. The evidence was overwhelming, enough to not only ruin Eric's reputation, but also hold him accountable for his financial and personal wrongdoings. The plan was simple. We would expose Eric publicly, ensuring he could no longer manipulate anyone else. As for Claire, she had made her choices, and now she would face the consequences alongside him. But as we finalized our plans, Sarah dropped one final bombshell. Eric wasn't just using Claire for the affair. He had been grooming her to take the fall for his financial schemes if things went south. Sarah's revelation that Eric had been grooming Claire as a scapegoat added another layer of betrayal to an already convoluted web of lies. It was clear now, Eric's manipulation wasn't limited to seduction and deceit. He had weaponized Claire's complicity, crafting an exit strategy that would leave her holding the bag if his schemes unraveled. That realization solidified my resolve. Eric had to face the full weight of justice, and Claire, though guilty in her own right, needed to understand the extent of the betrayal she had helped perpetuate. Armed with everything we had uncovered, Sarah and I put the final phase of our plan into motion. We compiled a dossier so damning it left no room for rebuttal. Emails, texts, financial statements, legal documents, and even the explicit videos that showcased Eric's pattern of manipulation. It wasn't just about exposing the affair anymore. This was about dismantling the empire of lies Eric had built over the years. The first step was to release the dossier strategically. Sarah's network of connections proved invaluable here. Friends in business circles, community groups, and even a journalist known for investigative exposés. Within hours, the story began to spread. It started small, a few whispers among mutual friends, a couple of posts on social media. But as more people shared the evidence, the fallout grew exponentially. Eric's reputation, once carefully cultivated and admired, collapsed like a house of cards. Business associates severed ties immediately. Projects he had been working on were canceled, his name scrubbed from company websites and social media pages. Former partners came forward, sharing their own stories of betrayal and manipulation. What surprised me most was the sheer volume of people who had been hurt by Eric over the years. Women he had seduced and discarded, friends he had deceived, and colleagues he had undermined. It seemed everyone had a story. Claire, too, faced the consequences of her choices. Her involvement in the affair was now public knowledge, and the revelation of her role in the financial schemes tarnished her reputation both personally and professionally. The woman who had once been admired for her poise and ambition now found herself the subject of scorn and ridicule. The fallout wasn't confined to whispers and online chatter. The financial evidence we had uncovered was damning enough to warrant legal action. I contacted the authorities, providing them with the full scope of Eric's fraudulent activities. The stolen funds, the forged loan documents, the shell businesses, every piece of his scam was laid bare. It didn't take long for the investigation to escalate. Eric was arrested within weeks, charged with fraud, embezzlement, and forgery. The mountain of evidence left little room for defense, and his lawyers scrambled to negotiate a plea deal that would reduce his inevitable prison sentence. Claire wasn't spared. While her involvement wasn't as extensive as Eric's, her complicity in the financial schemes tied her to the crimes. She faced charges of her own, along with civil suits from the people Eric had defrauded. It was a cruel irony. Her desperate attempts to cling to Eric and the security he promised had only secured her downfall. Watching it all unfold was surreal. For months, I had lived in the shadow of their betrayal, consumed by anger and heartbreak. But as their world crumbled around them, I felt an unexpected sense of peace. It wasn't joy. I took no pleasure in their suffering, but a deep satisfaction in knowing they could no longer hurt anyone else. As the dust settled, I focused on rebuilding my life. The divorce was finalized swiftly, thanks to the overwhelming evidence of Claire's infidelity and financial misconduct. I sold the house we had shared, shedding it like an old skin, and moved to a new city where no one knew my story. Starting over wasn't easy. There were moments when the weight of everything I'd been through threatened to pull me under. But each day, I reminded myself that I had survived, that I had faced the storm and come out stronger on the other side. Sarah and I stayed in touch. Our strange alliance had grown into a genuine friendship, built on trust and mutual respect. She had been instrumental in exposing Eric, and her determination to hold him accountable had inspired me more than I could put into words. Months later, I received an update on Eric's case. His plea deal had fallen through, and he was sentenced to several years in prison. Claire, too, faced consequences, though her sentence was less severe. The financial restitution she was ordered to pay left her bankrupt, a far cry from the life of security she had clung to so desperately. But the most surprising development came from an unexpected source. One evening, as I was settling into my new apartment, I received a letter in the mail. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but the return address was from the prison where Eric was serving his sentence. Curiosity got the better of me, and I opened it. The letter was brief, filled with the kind of self-serving remorse I had come to expect from Eric. He apologized for the pain he had caused, claiming he had lost control and made mistakes. But the most striking part was the final line. "You weren't the only one who suffered because of me. I hope you find peace in knowing that." The letter left me unsettled. It wasn't an admission of guilt. It was a vague, hollow attempt at absolution. But it also reminded me of the countless people Eric had hurt, the ripple effects of his lies and manipulations. In the end, I didn't need Eric's apology or Claire's regrets to move forward. The justice we had achieved wasn't just about punishing them. It was about reclaiming the narrative, about standing up against the lies that had once defined my life. As I stood on the balcony of my new apartment, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The betrayal had changed me, but it hadn't broken me. I had survived, exposed the truth, and found the strength to rebuild. And in that moment, I knew that the scars would fade, leaving behind only the lessons I had learned and the peace I had fought so hard to reclaim.